on to our main event. Our speaker for today is Dr. Lisa Tagliaferri. She is the Director of Developer Education at SourceGraph. She is the author of the open access book, How to Code in Python, and her popular guides have been accessed more than 40 million times. She was previously a researcher, educator, and builder of open source digital humanities software at City University of New York, MIT, and Harvard. Everyone, please welcome Lisa. Lisa, we can switch on to you now. Okay, so let me just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that warm introduction. And thank you everybody for joining today. I'm excited to talk about open source. It's one of my favorite things. I'm going to start here. I would like to talk today with you about open source and what open source has to gain by having all of you involved as contributors. We'll be going over the state of technology and open source. We'll talk about how to determine a good project to contribute to. We'll share some open source projects that are specifically made for beginners. And then I'll walk you through your first pull request. I'll do the demo. You can follow along if you would like to. And yes, this will be recorded, but not the Q&A at the end. You could follow along with the activity if you want to. If you do want to do that, I would encourage you to sign up for a GitHub account if you don't have one already. Download GitHub Desktop as well and have a code IDE or other text editor that you could work with code in handy. Awesome. So since we already had a nice introduction about me, just a little more context. I am the Director of Developer Education at SourceGraph. SourceGraph is a universal code search tool. My team and I right now are working hard to build an open source learning platform with lots of great resources to help new and experienced developers alike. My background is both in technical startups and also in research. So in higher education, I was a researcher, software developer, and teacher. My PhD is in medieval and Renaissance literature, and I also have done a lot of digital humanities work. So working with things like Python to understand humanities better and also to help humanities researchers as well. I've also volunteered as part of Stanford's Code in Place to teach Python, if some of you might be familiar with that. And I'm also a New York City ambassador to the Geekettes, which is a global organization devoted to supporting women innovators. So with that background, let's take a look at where we have come from and where we are going in terms of open source. So to put things in perspective a bit, we all know that in the past 30 to 40 years, we've been experiencing a digital revolution as we have moved from analog to digital electronics. It may go without saying, but considerable change has been brought about by digital computing and communication technology in recent decades. So in this chart, we see the tremendous increase of worldwide internet users. This is in millions. From 2004 to 2018. So as of around then, we have about 3.9 billion users worldwide out of 7.7 billion people in the world population. Alongside this, we see that there is a growing increase of jobs in the tech industry. 1.6 million jobs have been added since 2010. This is limited to the United States in this chart, but is indicative of, growing number of jobs in general. What about open source? So the rise of open source repositories has also been tremendous. Many open source repositories, also sometimes called repos, are now hosted on GitHub, which is a platform for collaborative software development. This chart shows the increase of software repositories that are hosted on GitHub from 2008 through 2013. Of course, this is not the only place to find open source repos, but it is indicative of the Verizon software made available through open source licenses. So in case, just to have a working definition of open source, this is a definition from Lynn Muldrow, who's a developer educator at DigitalOcean. She writes, open source software, also called OSS, is software that's freely available to use, redistribute, and modify, typically shared via public code repository hosting service. Open source is very collaborative. It can be updated quickly and as needed, offers reliable and flexible software that is not built on locked proprietary systems. Just a note here that free, also in the case of free software, refers to people being able to freely do whatever they would like with the software. It does not necessarily refer to price, though often open source software is also available to use without paying for it. There are several different open source licenses that are available, and you can learn more about those via the Open Source Initiative, which is at opensource.org. So why is open source important? It's very important because it lays the foundations and provides libraries for a lot of other software. Open source software is used in productivity apps. It's used in entertainment apps like Netflix, social media apps like TikTok. It is used in cars, and it is also used on Mars. So if you thought those 10 million repos in 2013 was a lot, as of January 2020, the last time that information was made available, I believe, GitHub reports having over 40 million users and more than 190 million repositories. At least 28 million of those are public or open source repositories. So this all sounds really great, right? There's a growth in internet access, there's growth in tech jobs, there's growth in open source software, except when we talk about people with access to the internet, with jobs in the tech industry, and those who are contributing to open source, who is it that we are talking about? Internet penetration rates vary dramatically across regions. In North America, about 90% of the population has access to the internet. In Africa, that number is below 40%. On an aggregate level, just under 60% of the world population has access to the internet. Tech industry jobs have been increasing. Who are getting those jobs? Looking at some major tech companies, Airbnb, Facebook, Google, we see that men who are from well-represented backgrounds make up the vast majority of the workforce. Underrepresented people of color, and by that we mean Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and those who identify as mixed race, are more underrepresented in the tech industry than you may think. Underrepresented women of color do not make up even 10% of the workforce in any of these major 6 companies. So this is industry. What is it like in open source? As of 2017, open source is 95% men. This open source survey was conducted by GitHub with partners in academia and industry, and researchers found that open source is anything but representative of a diverse space. A full 95% of respondents to the survey identified as male, only 3% identified as female, and 1% as non-binary. In terms of race, 16% of respondents to the survey said they belong to ethnic or national groups that are in the minority in the country they live in. So this, is not representative of the global population, but it really shows what is at stake here and what is at stake in open source. Technology, I believe, will only serve all communities if more people from different contexts are the stakeholders who are building technology and leading innovation. A large focus of my work is increasing tech literacy and helping more people learn about technology and what is at stake. I am at SourceGraph in particular today because their long-term mission is to help more people learn to code. Their mission states today only about 0.1% of the world's population can code. That tiny group has built software that runs the modern world and improves the lives of billions of people. Think of the possibilities if everyone was able to code. All around the world, more people would be able to solve problems and improve their lives by building software. We don't know exactly what these billions of coders will create, but we know that this will bring faster and more broadly beneficial technological progress. So my aside in the beginning, I noted that I'm a researcher of the Italian Middle Ages and Renaissance. And from that background, I understand pretty well what can be gained when you increase literacy across a population. People who do not have access to information before can now participate in the production of knowledge, and great innovation can occur. Open source is one obvious place where we can work to bring more people in. And I think if we could do that, we would all benefit from positive results. So with that background, where do we begin contributing to open source? There are a few ways that we may want to start getting involved, which we'll go over now. We'll go over how to assess whether an open source project is friendly or welcoming to new contributors. We'll talk through how to determine whether a project you are already familiar with may be a good place to begin. And we'll share some repositories that are designed for beginners to try out. And then at the end, we'll do a pull request. So when you're looking at repositories, I would say some parameters for judging a welcoming repository are that they have good docs, that they have a code of conduct, that it's an active repository, and that it also uses labels. Two labels that are good indicators for first-time contributors are this label Good First Issue and this label Help Wanted, which means that they're soliciting help from the community at large. So docs start with a good readme.md file. The .md stands for Markdown, which is the common way that text is shared in a open source repository. This will be at the root of that open source repo. Here is an example from the Kubernetes project on GitHub, which includes an overview of the project. It has guidance for getting set up to become a developer to the project, and it also has links for support. So in case you have trouble, there's somewhere to go. Additionally, you'll want to take a look and see whether a project has a contributing file. This is often called contributing.md. It might be in the root directory, or it might be somewhere else where they keep other docs. It shows that the project has thought about community contributors, and it will also give you guidance for how you can begin contributing. This example is from Jupyter Lab, which is just a really great example of a welcoming community-based repository in general. Not every repository is going to have a code of conduct, but it's a good indicator that the maintainers are thinking about the community and will plan to enforce collegial behavior. This example is from TensorFlow. Many projects leverage existing and well-known codes of conduct. Some popular ones are Contributor Covenant and the Geek Feminism Code of Conduct. So look for this and see how people are thinking about keeping an inclusive space in their repository. We also want to make sure before you start contributing to a project that that project is actually actively maintained. Some folks will archive their GitHub repos if they're no longer maintaining them, but they may not. As we see in this example, there has not been a commit since 2014. So if there are stale commits, a bunch of open issues and pull requests that have been unanswered for years, maybe even just months, they are unlikely to be a good place for you to spend your time contributing to them. If you want to continue to build off of an existing open source project, you may want to fork it and start over from scratch instead. But you may want to try to get the maintainer's blessing there. Another thing to look at is the issues section of the repository. This is, GitHub centric. You could see when you go onto a GitHub repository, there's code and then there's issues. The issues section, if it is, accepting contributors, if it is community focused repository, then you'll see if maintainers are actively labeling the issues. They may have labels for feature requests, for bug fix requests, and more. This example is from scikit-learn, which is a Python machine learning library. It shows that there is a lot of care given to labeling the issues, and that some of these include the good first issue labels, which signals that new contributors are welcome and encouraged, in fact, to contribute. If you're actively building software, you may already have dependency libraries that you think you may be able to improve just by going through your regular workflow. Sure. I saw the Q&A that to repeat examples of known codes of conduct. One of them is the contributor covenant. And one of them is Geek Feminism Code of Conduct. And I'll add those links at the end. So yeah, if you're actively building software, you may already have found that there are some places where you would like to improve that software. If this is the case, then you should seek out where that repository is hosted. You should go through that same process that I just described of, is this a welcoming repository for me to contribute to? Like, will my contributions be honored? And read through the relevant documentation, become familiar with the code base. I also encourage you to read the code, to search the code, to read through closed issues and merged pull requests to understand what has been successful in the past. When you are just starting out, a potentially time-scoped and valuable update may be to better explain something in the documentation that you may have gotten stuck at when you have been implementing something from the library within your own code base. So if you're going through something, you don't quite understand the documentation, but you are able to figure out the problem, it would be great for you to update and clarify that documentation for developers in the future. So sharing your knowledge and improving that end user experience or developer experience can be really valuable to a repository because it helps to bring in new users and new developers. There are a few repositories that help new contributors find welcoming projects. First Timers Only is a project that connects newcomers to open source with a list of open source curated repositories. They have the First Timers Only label to encourage open source contributions and new folks getting into open source. Up for Grabs is a website that collates open source tasks that are designed for new contributors as well. There's a few repos that have running lists of projects that accept new contributors. Awesome for beginners groups projects by programming language. So for Python developers, we could seek out the Python projects in particular. And then the awesome for non-programmers include repositories that may deal more with text than code, for example. Like if you want to, go through the process of opening a pull request without trying to find something new in the code base to contribute to. So now we're going to go through how to open your first pull request on an open source repository on GitHub. This project is Cloud Haiku. It's a project I developed for Hacktoberfest, which is a yearly celebration of open source in October. I encourage you to contribute when that comes around. I currently maintain this repository to support those who want to go through the mechanics of contributing to open source in a welcoming environment. This repository is a Jekyll website that hosts haikus written by the community, and I encourage those haikus to be about cloud infrastructure, but we will accept other haikus. So this is an example of a haiku and how it appears on the website. This is Octopus Cloud. If you're not familiar with the poem format of a haiku, it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. So if you would like to follow along here, if you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to go to github.com. And if you have an account, log in. If you don't have an account, go through and create one. And as we mentioned earlier, this is going to be recorded. So if you don't have this all set up now, don't worry. I'm just going to keep going through. If you have your GitHub set up, but you don't have GitHub Desktop, I'm going to demonstrate this for GitHub Desktop in particular. If you want a command line tutorial, I will drop that in the links later. So to download GitHub Desktop, it's desktop.github.com. You could download GitHub Desktop for your relevant operating system, and we'll keep going through, and you can follow along later if you don't have this set up yet. So the next step is to navigate to the repository that you would like to contribute to. In this case, we're going to contribute to github.com/do-community/cloud_haiku. I believe that was already included in the links. And I'm going to close my presentation so I could go through this process. Okay. So I believe if somebody could give me feedback that they could see these 3 windows, there's the GitHub Desktop, there's the GitHub repo, and then there's this.
Yeah, they're visible.
Okay, awesome. Cool. So the first thing we're going to do when we want to contribute to an open source repository, and we have our this is GitHub Desktop. I have other repositories in there. First, we're going to go to this code button and click on Open with GitHub Desktop. Oops. So I already. Okay. So now what we should have is our repository. It should also, the root of where GitHub will put it will be different for different computers, and you could set that root, but you should be able to also access it in your file system, and everything will be updated as you pull things down and start things off. So now we have it. We're going to start by making a new branch. You could often you will call this, for like related to a feature, or related to like a ticket you have to develop something. We're just going to call it Women Who Code Python, and I'll write my name and the date, and then I'm going to create a branch. So we're creating our own branch, so we keep everything clean on our own spaces. And then we're going to go to your code IDE of choice. So here I have the Cloud Haiku. The haikus are in this _haikus directory. And we're going to choose one of these to use that as like the template. I would encourage you to definitely read the README file because I spent a lot of time on it. But we're going to go through this by just kind of copying this. So this is what the haiku looks like. It's a markdown file, that .md. This was the haiku that I showed on the screen briefly earlier. And what we have here is we have this heading that we need for Jekyll. So we have these three hyphens. We have layout colon, which is the haiku layout, which is something that we described in the Jekyll. Let's see. I don't know if folks, if they're having trouble with the screen and the camera. Let me see if I could. Does that make it better? No. I don't know if the panelists have any other suggestions. I'll keep going. So here here's the header. So there's the layout, the haiku, there's the title. In this case, we call this haiku Octopus Cloud. There's the author. In this case, the author is Sammy. And then we have a return, and then we write our haiku. So I actually do not have a haiku in mind. But basically what we could do here is create this new file. We'll save it as our new file. Let's see. So Women Who Code August 3rd.md. So make sure that it's in this underscore haikus directory. We click save, and then let's call this Women Who Code Open Source. We'll change this to Women Who Code. We'll change it to Women Who Code Python as the author. And then I don't know if anybody has a haiku. Let's see, Women Who Code, Women Who Code. Women Who Code Code. And then Women Who Code Python in open source. Python in open source. Python open source repos. Don't judge me on my poetic ability. Python open source repos. Changing chain. I don't know, I'm using title case, but are changing the world. Okay, cool. So now we have a little haiku. We're gonna go to this. This is GitHub Desktop. So basically what happens when you make a change in the repository. So what we did is we created a new file. We added these lines of code. And what we want to do now is we want to commit this to the branch. You could do it. You could publish the branch and then commit. We're just, it should not matter on the desktop. So add Women Who Code Python haiku. So we're going to commit that. Then we're going to publish the branch. And then if we go back to here, we should have this branch available. And then we're going to do the compare. So once you do that and you're, I am this person, I am logged into GitHub. This GitHub is related to that username. So I should have this notification that says that this branch has recent pushes less than a minute ago. So then I'm going to do compare and pull request. So this is where we're opening the pull request. So here this says that we're adding the Women Who Code Python haiku. Yes. there is a question that says, did you edit the file in your text editor? I did. So the text editor, I did it right in VS Code. So just to show you that again. So basically, I took a shortcut and I copied this, and then I created a new file. I pasted this file in, and then I saved it as the title.md, and then that showed up. We're not gonna keep that though. But then that showed up right in here as something that was changed to the Git repo. So the local Git repo is basically a mirror of the open source repo, except we're going to be a few commits ahead or behind, depending on when we update it. So it's nice to add a little bit of context. So adding my haiku to the repository. So then we would create the pull request. And then what would happen next is one of the maintainers would review it. What the maintainer would do is they may look at the files change and make sure that it follows the guidelines of the repository. Here they may also start a review and request changes like, let's see, I don't know why it's not letting me request changes, but they may request changes, they may approve the file, and then at the end they would merge the pull request if everything is good. And they may thank you for your contributions. If it's not an appropriate haiku, we did used to have a test system that would do some automated testing. So you would be able to tell, we need to do a little more work on this repository to bring that back. But you may experience in other repositories that there is like a testing suite that would check to make sure that this is following, the given parameters of the project. Cool. So there's a question, what is the process if they request changes? So if somebody requested changes here, what you could do is go back and forth with them. So if they say, why are you talking about Python? Why aren't you talking about Java instead? Then you could be like, okay, well, I'm gonna change it to Java. And then what would happen once you save it, then there'll be a change that you would see reflected here. And then you could just change it to Java and then push it to up here. And then there's an update here. So if there were comments, then you would just see these kind of back and forth going on there. Awesome. So I would encourage everybody to submit a haiku, and I'm happy to pull those in. And I think there's another Q&A. So the haiku that I just created, is it a folder? So it's not a folder. I'll share my screen again. So all the haikus live inside the _haikus directory. So all of these are individual haikus. So it looks like, this is not the raw. It looks like this when you're looking at it on GitHub, but that's how it looks like on your code repository, on your code IDE. So if you want to add a haiku to this project, then what you would do is you would navigate to this _haikus directory on your local machine, and then you would create a new file that's a .md file. You would write that header out like we went over, and then write the haiku underneath with the line breaks is a little cleaner. to make sure that it sticks. And if you get stuck at all, there is the README file. I could also I'll share in the chat some other resources. There's a video that walks you through this. We have a couple of tutorials to help you go through this too. I think if we are in a good place, we could move to like a live Q&A, and we'll stop doing the screen recording if that is helpful, so that that won't be archived, only this will be archived.
Yeah, sure, we can stop the recording.